This video is demonetized for a reason, and it's age restricted for a reason too. I don't show anything over the top, but if you're sensitive, please, if any kind of violence shocks you and appalls you, don't watch this video. But we're talking about police brutality in China. I'm going to be sharing some video clips that I shot myself in China, and I'm going to be explaining the situation surrounding them. And then later, I will be showing you some video clips that were shot in rural China and all around China really, and that have leaked out, and we're going to discuss them. And I'm going to tell you what's going on based on my own personal experience of having lived in and traveled around China for 14.5 years. So let's start out with the more civilized stuff. I spent the majority of my time in China in a city called Shenzhen, which is a first-tier city. You can liken it to Paris or New York, anything like that. And in China, the larger cities like Shenzhen, Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Chongqing, Qingdao, all these bigger, more well-known cities are usually fairly okay, and you don't see that much when it comes to police brutality and violence, although you do still see it, and I have some stories about that. But I filmed a protest here outside the government building in Shenzhen. I would see them often, and I always wondered what was going on, because it's obviously some kind of an organized gathering. Now, I just decided this day to film it because this was like the 5th or 6th time I'd seen a big gathering. This one isn't the largest that I saw. And I found out by asking my Chinese friends later exactly what was going on. But basically, if you want to have a protest in China, you can't just have a protest just like everywhere else in the world. You kind of have to apply for permission to have a protest, but it's very different in China. You have to apply for like a permit to have a protest, and then you all get this special little vest that you have to wear. You see everyone's wearing the same clothing to identify them as protesters. You will also see that there are armed police. There were actually armored vehicles parked on either side of this little protest, and a whole bunch of armed police, which I thought was excessive considering the small amount of people there. And you'll see that the police are going around and filming and recording everybody's face, so that they have a proof of every single person that was there. Now, this was about a real estate thing. Most of the protests in China that you find are somehow linked to either land grabs or real estate scams. The majority. Of course, you get ones that are related to peer-to-peer or investment scams that were backed by the government, which fell through, and then they go to the government to try and bail them out. But the majority are in the rural areas anyway, where the local government has forcibly removed farmers off of their land in order to build, real estate and do this whole big cash grab that happens in China, because the economy more or less runs on these sort of very fast, rapidly growing real estate projects. Anyway, this is what it was all about. This is just one of the many I filmed. Now, just down the road from here, we have the Mix City Mall, which is a fancy mall, LV and Gucci and all that kind of stuff. It's actually where I used to live in Shenzhen. One of the better places I lived anyway. I lived in a whole bunch, but this is one of the better places. And I was there just going to grab lunch, and I noticed a huge amount of security guards and policemen. And I was like, what's going on? And there we had a small gathering of parents, and it was some kind of protest against something that was happening to their children in school or something along those lines. I can't remember the exact context, but you could see this little gathering of about 15 to 20 parents were there on the steps trying to protest something, and they were surrounded by security guards. The police came in there and eventually carted them all off, and it shows you just how much control China has over any kind of protests, usually, but they do get out of hand. I'm going to show you a couple of clips from around the country now. This is not in one specific area. I'm going to show you the clip, and if you look down there at the bottom, you will see where that specific clip was taken from. But in every single one of these clips that you see now, what you have is you have a disgruntled village, and this happens a lot. I've driven and ridden my motorcycle through a lot of these rural areas, and what happens is the local government, in order to generate money, will usually give an offer to the local farmers to buy their land in order to sell it to a real estate company. Then the real estate company sells that to investors, many of them who never even see the property. And this is what drives this kind of false economy in China, is this whole land grab thing. You take the land, you sell it to the real estate company sells it to the investors before even spending a cent, before even ground is broken on the thing, and then they very quickly and cheaply build these buildings, which are of very shoddy and poor quality usually. But very often the farmers don't want to move off of their land, so they either try to stay there and refuse the offers from the government, which then results in thugs being hired to force them off the land. It also results in the police and the government just forcing them off anyway and forcing them to take an offer. Or if they're lucky, they will come to some kind of an agreement. So you'll find the farmers and the local people kind of hold on as long as they can and try to get as much compensation as possible for the land. But more often than not, it's just a simple case of the government trying to force them off of their land. There are all sorts of stories about people going out, and while they're out in the local market or something, the police and the construction companies come in there and demolish all their houses. They come back to nothing. This is something you can look up yourself. It's very, very common. And that's why you get what you see here. These are disgruntled people who are having their land taken away from them. And of course, they will fight tooth and nail to keep it. So you often see these ridiculous battles with rocks and sticks and fireworks and stuff against these, the police and the riot squads and stuff who come in to basically force the farmers off of their land. So let's move on from these sort of riots, because remember, these things happen very often in China, but they're suppressed by the news, so you won't see them. Even local Chinese people don't see them. I mean, I personally know people who've lived in some of these areas or currently live in some of these cities and areas where these riots and protests take place who didn't even know they happened, even though they were living there at the time that this took place. Anyway, let's move past these sort of land grab riots and these clashes with villagers and police, because that's maybe a topic all on its own. There's so much material out there, I could really create a video just about that. Let's talk about the kind of average police brutality that you may come across in China, because I personally have seen it myself, and this is the urban management, which is loosely a branch of the police. It's still part of the government and everything, and they have uniforms. They're called chengguan. They're not police officers, but they are still a part of the police and the urban management enforcement team, really. That's what we should call them. What they do, their entire job is to stop illegal street vendors and people breaking bylaws. So, for instance, if you put a sign out on the road where it shouldn't be in a pedestrian walkway, they're the guys that come around and tell you to move the sign. But it's never really that simple. The way it works in China is these guys are basically thugs, and in order to enforce their rules, they don't come and have a nice negotiation with you and ask you and give you a warning letter or something. They come in there and they confiscate all your goods, or more than often they just destroy your goods on site, beat you up if you resist them, destroy your property, arrest you, do all sorts of things. There are, again, so many videos of the bad behavior of these chengguan, and they're kind of difficult to control because they do have authority. They have the authority of the local government, and the people can't stand up against them, but when they do, they really feel the wrath of these guys. You often see this. I have seen this in action myself. I've seen it amicably resolved, where they just go in there and tell people, hey, take this down, take down your awning, move your crap out the street. And I've also seen it where they come in and start shoving people around and basically stealing and confiscating everyone's goods. Anyway, that's a bit of an escalation there. But now let's move on to, traffic police. And this one's kind of near and dear to my heart, because being a motorcycle rider and riding through the majority of China on my motorcycle, I know very well that many of the cities have banned motorcycles. So what they did was, in order to clean up the cities, they have many reasons for this, and some of them are valid reasons and some of them are completely invalid. But in China, motorcycles are seen as a poor man's transport. It's not like in the West, people usually ride motorcycles as a hobby. So it's seen as somebody driving a Harley. He's probably doing that in his spare time. He probably has money, and that's his little weekend toy or something. No, in China, it's the poor people who can't afford a car. They use a motorbike, right? So in order to clean up the image of the bigger cities, they banned motorcycles outright. They also had other reasons like snatch and grab, robberies, environmental reasons because the bikes pollute a lot, things like that. Of course, there's some valid reasons, but the main reason is to clean up the image of the cities. So this resulted in many cities, and it's kind of tough to know because as you're riding through China, you kind of have to go online and try and figure out on forums and stuff to figure out which cities you can't ride into. But there have been plenty of situations where I've ridden into a city which is now banned. You actually can't tell because quite often there are still bikes riding around, even in a city where they've banned motorcycles. But you ride in, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a plainclothes policeman, traffic policeman, will come and grab your key out of your ignition, force you off your bike, and then take your bike away. And in our case, at least with myself and Lao 86, our motorcycles were legally registered insured, we had proper driver's licenses, all of that kind of thing. And so with a lot of negotiation, we could usually talk our way out of it, or we could get our bikes back. But of course, being a foreigner helped a lot in those circumstances. Thing is, they banned motorcycles. Okay, fine. So everybody, realized that they couldn't fight against it anymore. So they moved on to electric bikes. And electric bikes were fine and legal for a while too. And then they banned electric bikes, especially electric bikes over a certain size. So, those tiny little foldable ones, they're still legal in some of the cities. But bigger electric bikes that kind of look like mopeds and stuff, they got banned. So, unfortunately, this is still the main form of transport for a lot of people. And as you can see in these videos, the traffic police are pretty brutal when it comes to stopping people riding e-bikes, because obviously, and I'm going to be honest, the populace doesn't listen to the law, so they do put the law up there saying you're not allowed to ride an e-bike. People still do it anyway. Then they say, hey, you got a deadline to get rid of your e-bike. People don't listen. They're like, listen, you really can't ride an e-bike here. They still don't listen. So they get to this point where they kind of have enough of the situation and they set up roadblocks. And if anyone just stops at a traffic light or something on an e-bike, they pounce. They will literally grab people off of bikes while they are riding. They will throw obstacles in the way to make them crash in order to confiscate their e-bikes. And I always felt sad every time I'd see a flatbed truck in Shenzhen, for instance, going past, piled up with e-bikes that had been confiscated. I actually had my e-bike confiscated from me at one point too when the laws were changing over. I wasn't aware that I couldn't ride my e-bike into a certain district because the rest of the city was fine. But that specific district was off limits. So I rode in there and cops ran up, took the keys out, took my e-bike, confiscated it. And I eventually did get it back, but it was a hell of a difficult thing. But anyway, I'm really going down the garden path here. What you see here is the police enforcing that. Now, you can see that they are not afraid to physically manhandle and injure and hurt a female, who's there by herself. They really don't give a crap. And let's move on to the more serious stuff. Okay? Police brutality in China is big because life is cheap in China and there is no fighting back against the government. I mean, what kind of police beat up an old lady, for instance, kicking her in the gut? That's, if that kind of thing happened in the Western world, I think we would have a huge movement against it. I can't think of hand when that has happened, but let's just say the police are like brutal. Here we see a police officer leaning on a young woman's neck. And she's screaming out for help. Imagine this happened in the Western world. I'm pretty sure we'd have a lot of people getting behind this woman and the police officer would be fired and the entire police force would come under scrutiny and there'd be calls to defund the police, that type of thing. But not in China because the government has the police's back, the police force's back. The government is the one who stands by them because the police are the ones enforcing their rules and their laws. And if somebody comes out and tries to accuse a police officer of doing something, more often than not, the person who is accusing the police officer of doing something will end up in a worse situation if they do so. It gets worse than this, my friends. I have a lot of footage that's really horrible, which I cannot show here. Before I continue with sharing some of my experiences, I would like to explain to you why it is that I'm showing you this footage and why it is that I am talking about this stuff. Am I trying to create animosity towards China or Chinese people? Absolutely not. I'm actually trying to show you what the average Chinese person has to deal with, especially the poorer, more rural Chinese who do not have the money and the connections to avoid this kind of thing. You have to realize that the average Chinese person is absolutely powerless against the police. It's something that the Western world takes for granted. If a policeman does something bad and is filmed or witnesses see him do it, they can be held accountable. They can lose their jobs. They themselves can go to jail. This is not the case in China. If a policeman is seen doing something bad, beating up an old woman, leaning on someone's neck, disappearing people, murdering someone inadvertently, you know, the chances are, no, not the chances are, nothing's going to happen to that person. It's just the way China works. The second reason why I'm showing you this stuff and telling you about these things is as a warning, because I have recently been seeing a lot of people who are enraged with the police forces in the West, especially America after the whole George Floyd incident, etc. People are calling to defund the police. People are saying the police are too brutal. People are, you know, really attacking police forces, especially in America right now, the police force. And of course, change has to happen. But I see people using China as a shining example of how the police force could be. I mean, I'm not even joking here. I know people and I see people saying things like, wow, you know, the way that the Chinese police and government deals with the populace and enforces the law is better and makes it safer for everyone. These morons do not understand what's going on because either they haven't seen it for themselves like I have, or they purposefully push aside the inconvenient parts of this whole situation, of the Chinese police and the Chinese government. These people are saying that the heavy-handed Chinese government and police system are better than the American police and government system. Do not go down this dark path. The Chinese law system and police are still far behind the West. Anyone who knows anything about history will know that an all-powerful, unchallengeable and opaque police force is a nightmare. Look to the Stasi of East Germany, Mussolini's secret police, the KGB, Cuba's secret police, the Gestapo, for Christ's sake. None of these brutal police forces had even a fraction of China's control over its populace. Never mind the sophisticated surveillance system that they have over the people and the populace, but also the ability to censor the news absolutely around the country. And of course, with the backing of this all-powerful government, they are an unstoppable force. So please do not look to China for inspiration. I have had a lot of comments on my videos when I separate Chinese people from the Chinese government, because I do truly believe that the Chinese people, and the majority of them, are good people, and that the Chinese government and the way it operates are bad people. But I get a lot of comments saying, but it's Chinese people's fault because they don't stand up to their government. You know, that you get the leaders that you deserve. And there is some truth to that, but at the same time, you cannot say that without having experienced just how much the Chinese government and police have power over the people. There's a reason why every single person that I interview on my channel has to have their face blurred and their voice altered, even Westerners. There are very few people like me who are willing to put their face out there because the repercussions are huge. I have been dealing with attacks against myself and my family non-stop for about 4 or 5 years now. And I'm in a very unique position where, although it affects me greatly, I still can support myself through my videos. Obviously not this one, it's not monetized, but I have people out there like you who either support me on Patreon or at least follow me and help spread the word of my videos. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. But put yourself in the shoes of an average Chinese citizen, or even another Westerner who has a view against the CCP. They would be utterly destroyed. Their careers would be ended because these guys go after your employers. Their families' livelihood and health would be put in jeopardy because if you're a Chinese person and you're outspoken against the CCP, the first thing they do is lean on your family in China, and they will put them under house arrest. They will arrest them. They will pressure them in order to try and make you stop, to silence you. You have to understand how devastating that can be. There is no way to push back against this in China. You can't say, hey, the police are harassing me, and go cry to your local congressman or your government or whatever it is. The police are harassing me and they're blackmailing me and they're coercing me into not speaking out. You can't go and do that. It doesn't work that way. It's not like the West. And of course, there's a whole lot more traditionally and societally that a Chinese person would have to suffer for going against the CCP. It would absolutely destroy them and their entire family. For a Westerner like myself, I mean, you just need to take a look at what's happened to me. I've got hate websites put up against me, calling me racist. I've got random people on the internet all around trying to call me this monstrous racist person. I've got people contacting who they think are my employers to try and get me fired. I've got people trying to attack my family in South Africa who've got nothing to do with anything that I do. Random cousins and other people that they find on Facebook with my name, my surname, they attack them too. You know, my wife, everything to do with me is under attack all the time. And, it's something that, well, I understand why very few people like me actually speak out against the CCP. So at the end of the day, guys, I would like to again stress the whole point that my videos are here to help you understand China, and these days, more often than not, understand how the Chinese government operates so that you can avoid the pitfalls. Next time you start to look to China for inspiration on how to control your populace, or inspiration on the police tactics or anything like that, think twice. They're basically just a group of mafia thugs, and this is not a path that we should ever consider going down. Till next time, you know the drill. As always, stay awesome.